Okay, so we are here with a group of women and John Pendle to discuss sexual misconduct that seems to be occurring in a lot of sanghas and organizations and just throughout our culture as a whole. My name's Dana. I'm from the Tattooed Buddha, and we have Kelly Shore, who is a writer and has been writing for the Tattooed Buddha, and Jennifer Mazzoni of Help Mama Meditate, and she also has written for the Tattooed Buddha, and Shalon Bradley, who's been writing as well and is very active in the Buddhist community, especially has been active in Against the Stream, and I'm sure a lot of other different organizations as well. And John Pendle is joining us via audio because he doesn't have a webcam that's working right now. And John does a lot of different things at the Tattooed Buddha and is a writer as well. So just to start off, we talked about a little bit about what had happened yesterday with the address that went on the live video chat with Against the Stream. And we're hoping to talk about that as well as sexual misconduct as a whole. So does anybody want to start off with thoughts about this? How about Kelly?
Oh, okay. I was being nice. I shouldn't do that. I think that watching last night's live response from Noah Levine regarding accusations of sexual misconduct really served as a template for a lot of people responding to sexual misconduct. It was a blaming, minimizing, 90 minutes of explanation that offered absolutely no accountability or explanation. And it really showed, I think, the frustration of this movement. We've got to this place where women are speaking out and women are being believed. And I think as a woman, I always kind of thought, once women start saying it, once people start believing it, things will change. And what we're seeing is, you know, that's a long climb up a cliff that goes nowhere. Because the response on behalf of the men who are accused or are proven to have engaged in sexual misconduct is so disappointing. And pretty much my view of last night's discussion, which was a 90-minute, well, probably about an hour of talk and a lot of meditation, was it was supposed to be a discussion about the accusation of sexual misconduct, but instead was just a really long speech about how the accusation affected him and his sort of ludicrous explanation, which was he didn't view it as sexual misconduct, so it wasn't. And nothing is more frustrating as a woman and as a Buddhist to hear someone say, my mantra for being accused by multiple women of sexual misconduct is, I forgive myself. Well, that's fine, but there are other people involved. In this case, there's a whole Buddhist community who is involved. And ultimately, his rationale was, I don't feel like it was sexual misconduct. And pretty much, if I had to take that whole 90 minutes and put it into one jar, what I heard was him saying, because he said point blank, I have lots of notes from last night, he said, quote, from my perspective, it wasn't sexual misconduct. And then he went on and said that he didn't understand power very well and he didn't understand relationships very well. And the whole thing kind of sounded like, Noah, did you rob a bank? No. I don't think I robbed a bank. I just visited the money. And although I've run banks for 30 years, I didn't understand that you can't put it in your pocket and walk out the door. That's what that whole discussion seemed like. And that was, to me, such a great minimization of the community, of the issue. And there was just a number of really cringeworthy, hair-raising moments. And the key to it was, the very first thing he said when the video started was, I want to talk about this because they made an announcement that they're closing against the stream. And I know that announcement has caused a lot of suffering. Well, no, that announcement isn't causing suffering. His actions are causing suffering. And there was a lot of that language throughout that really worked to diffuse blame or accountability and kind of shed it off into minimalization, shed it off into somebody else's fault. Long periods of speech that really wasn't about anything other than his feelings and how he felt about it. And I think that's the stunning thing that we're seeing in the response to sexual misconduct, which is probably the mindset that leads to someone acting with misconduct, is the minute there's an accusation, it isn't about who is hurt or how we can recover from hurt, but how this accusation is hurting the person who engaged in misconduct. And it becomes this sort of narcissistic revolution where the camera spins right back to that person and things flow in that direction. So I was very disappointed that, and at the same time, it was very frustrating. He had this little piece of paper with handwritten stuff all over it, and he said he had written out the whole truth to tell us, which was very exciting. And then he put the paper down where the camera was and said, "My lawyer says I can't tell it to you." Well, that little prop sat in front of the camera the entire 90 minutes as if to say, well, I do have the truth and it's in my possession, but you can't have it. And instead we got this really linguistic double and triple talk about the difference between that. And so ultimately the three things, and then I'll let somebody else address some of these issues. The three lessons he didn't mean to teach, and that's something I've said with Shambhala. I was a member of the Shambhala community. I've since transitioned from that community, not simply because of the sexual misconduct issue there, but an entire sort of philosophical difference. But I saw it with Shambhala. You see it in the things that come out nationally, is these are men with power. These are men with powerful positions. These are men who run businesses. And particularly as a Buddhist, when you look at Sakyamuni Rinpoche, the leader of Shambhala, and Noah Levine, these are men who have for years, not just a few years, many years, been thought of as somebody with great wisdom. So somebody with great ability who can teach us things we couldn't learn anywhere else. And they don't understand the simplest things, like don't hurt people sexually. And so in Noah's position, and last night as he sat in a teaching position, in a teaching vein, these are pretty much the things that he's been teaching. He taught last night that I don't think he meant to teach. And anybody, and you know this as a person who writes about Dharma, it's not the lessons that teach that bother you, it's the ones you teach that you didn't mean to teach. And what he pretty much taught last night was, you should follow the Dharma unless your lawyer tells you you shouldn't. And that's not really what I understand to be transparency or truth. I don't think truth stops because your lawyer says no. The second one he really taught that I saw was, if you don't think you hurt someone, you didn't. And that's a ridiculous thought and lesson. And yet it was played out over and over again last night, to where he ended with telling everybody he would be okay, and he had a sense of equanimity about the whole thing. Well, there's a lot of fire going on in lives of many people, but it's okay because he feels good and he's going to be okay. And the third lesson he taught that I really had was, as long as you forgive yourself, there are no consequences other than whatever karma may come. And so it was a really abdication of anything that I think people who look at and take the courage to call out sexual misconduct need in response. And in this case, it was an incredibly self-directed thing. The most audacious thing he said at the very end, one of the last things he said before he started selling t-shirts was, I hope this has been helpful. And I sat there with my mouth hanging open. I thought, helpful to who? Helpful to you. Because he was the only person in that conversation. He never mentioned the women who were harmed. He really didn't mention that the community had been harmed. But he did talk about his loss of income. So that's the thing that I thought we saw in this, was a template for what's going to stall and what is stalling the Me Too movement, or stalling what we really want from all of this pain, which is change, is now that we've got the highway halfway built, we need someone to pick up the other side and say, let's be accountable. And that certainly didn't come from either of the Buddhist leaders who have recently been called out for sexual misconduct.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I was talking with the Tattoo Buddha team earlier today, which consists of mostly men, actually. And we were talking about sexual misconduct as a whole and the way our culture is the way it is. And one of them, it might have been Daniel, I'm not sure, mentioned that, women have always known this. And for men, it's kind of like a newsflash. Really? Women have to deal with this on a regular basis. And one of the other guys said something like, wow, men really suck. And I said, I don't think that men suck as a whole. I don't see it that way. I think that the culture needs to change. And, the fact is that if you have a sister or a mother or a daughter or a friend or wife or girlfriend, your chances are a female in your life is going to have some type of sexual assault or sexual misconduct done to her at some point in her life. It's the majority. It gets everyone knows someone who it's happened to. And just sitting with that statistic and that concept is pretty enlightening in itself. And I think the culture needs to change. Okay, so can we hear from someone else? Anybody else want to talk?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Kelly was saying and what you were mentioning too, Dana, is just, I think the biggest thing is with why like you're saying, with why the Me Too movement is just kind of coming to a standstill, is there's just no taking of responsibility for these actions. And a lot of these men who are accused have money, have power, they're able to buy their way out of these situations. And there's just, I think a lot of it too is, women need to come together and support each other as well. I feel like unfortunately, I'll see women saying negative comments about some of the women who have become like front runners of the Me Too movement, and they are making negative comments about these women, saying, why are they saying this? And did this really happen? And I just find that kind of disturbing, because I feel like during these really difficult moments for people's lives, the last thing they need are for women to also tear them down. So it's nice to be able to be in this discussion with other women, to kind of just come together and talk about this and bring this out in the open, because I feel like there's dissenting voices at times, and you'll see a lot in social media where people are kind of, behind their screens and they feel a little braver to tear someone down. But it's definitely something that just needs to be communicated, needs to be out there, needs to be open. I have 2 young daughters, and this kind of stuff just horrifies me that I still have to worry about this in this day and age, that we've come so far, yet we've not come far at all. So I just find it disturbing. And for the sake of my daughters and for other people's daughters and their daughters, this just needs to change. Something needs to be different. And I think the first step, and maybe it's because I'm a speech therapist and I'm biased, but I think the first step is just open communication and putting this out there. And unfortunately, since Noah didn't really seem to want to take responsibility for anything, but, just forcing him to talk, forcing these people to kind of come out of hiding, because once these people get accused, they kind of seems like go into hiding, and make them kind of speak, make them come out. And even if they're not going to own up to it, at least he was forced to talk for 90 minutes or whatever, the amount of time was, and like start a discussion.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good point. He didn't talk about it, but now we can talk about it because he didn't talk about it.
Right, exactly. It just sparks that discussion of, this is something that needs to be just an everyday topic. This is something that needs to be talked to with boys and girls when they're going to school. This just needs to be something that is just part of our everyday common dialogue, that's not hidden in the shadows, that's not hushed up. you know, America has a really big issue with sexuality in general, and we're like probably one of the most prudish countries in the Western world. And I just think this kind of stuff needs to be talked about, that this is what happens to women, this is what happens to girls, and we just need to be open and not just put it on the girls, but boys need to learn, like, you know, this is what's happening, this is what other guys do to some women, you know, like not all men are bad, but there are bad people, you know, and we need to kind of let everyone know about this and not just fall on the shoulders of girls to carry with them their whole lives.
So I'd like to jump in and add a few points. This has been really challenging for me. Did I take myself off mute? Okay, good. I have a relationship. I had a relationship with the ATS. With ATS, I did facilitator training, 2 rounds of facilitator training, one with Noah and one with Vinny and Joanna. I practiced with ATS for several years in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. And I'm not surprised at the way that last night's talk went, and I really wanted to be surprised. I really wanted to see an acknowledgement that what is the intention that you put out is not always what is received. I wanted to see the understanding that it wasn't, you know, it wasn't just one woman. And I think that that's part of where everything started to balloon, is that at first it was one woman. And I will be one of the, I sent a letter to Mary Stankiewicz when I first heard, and I said, you know, I don't believe this to be the case. I know that he has a tendency to say things that are not the most appropriate, but I was ready to stand and support him. And then more stuff came out, and more stuff came out, and more stuff came out. And, you know, we do have to support the women. We do have to listen to, hear, believe, and support. It takes so much courage to come forward and speak out in these kind of situations. And then we have this very, you know, my mother, I promised my mother I was not going to say the F word, but we have this very screwed up culture where we live very much online. I've never met any of you, but I feel like I know at least Dana and Kelly and, well, okay, all of you who also write for Tattooed Buddha. But, you know, Noah has always been like my little brother. Like, that's how I viewed him. Even as a teacher, he's always been like a little brother, kind of. That's the energy that I have with him. And I've had people tell me that, you know, you talk to him the way that no one else will talk to him. And that's just kind of me. But with our social media has been really maladaptive to processing. And Saturday night, I went out with 2 other people who are still active in Against the Stream and Refuge Recovery. And we were talking about that, you know, we really could use a cooling off time. Like, if you see something online, give yourself 3 days to respond. Like, really sit with it for a little while. before you respond. And of course, the next day I saw something really offensive on one of the strings on one of the Facebook posts, and I responded, and I was sickened at how that was all taken. I don't have daughters. I have nieces. I have cousins. I have all of you. We have all of us that we have to stand up for. And we've been doing this for so long without listening to the truth, without hearing our truths, without hearing our stories, like getting it all out. And different people are uncomfortable with different actions, different stuff. And it really bothers me because I heard the words out of Noah's mouth about being careful around sexuality, being careful around the teachings, being careful around the precepts. And then to have him say last night that, you know, the Buddha doesn't talk about promiscuity.
That was so horrible.
Seriously, I was like, what? Did you not read that? Because I'm fairly certain that is part of the precepts. Like that's 3 and 5. You know, like, okay, but we'll go with that. So I found it really tough to take. And I found it sad. And I'm sad that Against the Stream is closing. I'm sad for the people who still get a lot out of that community. But you know, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to move on from that model. Maybe it's time to move on to a model that is more inclusive, that does have, you know, people saying, if you can't handle this power and you can't handle these things, then you don't get to be in charge anymore. You know, you want to practice the Dharma, you want to spread the word of the Dharma, you want to teach the Dharma. That's great. Your audience is now smaller because you used your power in an inappropriate manner. And we have these guidelines. You know, it's like the rules of a sonnet. Within the rules of a sonnet are very strict, but within those rules, you have ultimate freedom. The precepts for me work very much in that way. And the precepts that I took are not the same. I also am a member of the Order of Interbeing with Deer Park. So those precepts are far more specific than the ones that we took with ATS, and far more specific than the teacher training ethics, or the teacher ethics that are provided by ATS as well. And, you know, so, but within this these really strict barriers, you have this ultimate freedom. I'm sorry that you lost that.
I think one of the things that I hear you saying, and I really, really heard in Jennifer when she was talking, is it's not, I have an echo. I think to me, the question is not just don't teach people to sexually harm each other, but even more basic lessons. And Jennifer's right, they need to go to boys and girls and apparently adults. When you hurt someone, the answer is, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And that were two words I did not hear last night at all. Not to the women who were harmed, not to the community that is lost. Wait, I'm getting a note from about somebody's speakers. Ooh. Let's see, how do we, oh, let me turn it. Oh, okay. All right, so I'm okay now? Great. So what I'm saying is that there are basic lessons that we need to teach across the board. And, you know, there are things like how to accept responsibility for what you do, how to apologize for what you do. We don't apologize in our culture anymore. We want to explain. We never want to say, I'm sorry this happened. And I think part of changing the society for our girls and for our boys, and for our children and for ourselves, is getting back to that, almost like the precept, getting back to that basic structure that says, when you do something that harms somebody, the answer is, I'm sorry, what can we do? And I think, you know, particularly because so much of Against the Stream is in the recovery community, where telling the truth about what you did is, you know, right there. I mean, that's a big part of that community. It's a big part of getting well. And it was really subverted. And so I think that's where, you know, and Jennifer, maybe you can speak to that, how we need to kind of take our language back or take our abilities back to that communication that's almost like the foundation that's been lived out from underneath us and creates these experiences.
Yeah, and I wish I knew where to even begin. Honestly, I guess school education would be wonderful, but how to implement that would be overwhelming. But I feel like even if just one person, you know, starts it somewhere, it can spread, you know, in a good way. Of just, like you said, acknowledging these women's stories, acknowledging what has happened to them. That I think is just a huge step in the right direction, instead of like second guessing them or questioning things like, oh, did this really happen? Or did you do something to make him do that? Or what were you wearing? Or, you know, these types of questions, these types of questions that women who are victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment get all of the time, which is just so disturbing, that instead of saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this happened to you, instead it's like, well, what did you do to him? What did you do to bring this about? Were you flirting with him? What did you say? What did you do? What did you wear? And I feel like girls and women are told to just always be so cautious about how they act around men, because they may set them off, or I don't know. You know, it always just seems to be something that women have to do by themselves. And so I think it just has to be an education that goes like for boys and girls, men and women. So it just, I don't know. I just feel like this openness needs to happen. And I'm hoping with these kind of stories being in the media and being in something like Hollywood that people actually pay attention to, that this will create a dialogue in schools, or maybe create a dialogue with parents and their children about what's happening. But I'm not so sure if that will be the case.
I wanted to say something too, and this is something that I hear a lot, especially from men, but it can be anybody really. Why didn't anybody say anything before? Why did it take so long for this person to speak up? Why was it this one person who made the comment, and then all of a sudden 4 or 5 other people say something? And I think that we all understand why it's hard to speak up, or why sometimes it takes a long time. There's a power dynamic, and it's usually way askew. And there's the power dynamic, and then there's the shame, and then there's the self-doubt, because it's not typically black and white. I mean, sometimes it is black and white. Sometimes it's very clear that what happened was criminal and, victim, assailant, bam. But other times there's a lot of gray area, and the victim isn't really sure. Well, did I give off the wrong signal? Was I not being clear with what my intention was? Is this at all my fault? What happens to me if I come forward with something? So there's all of this that's at play in the victim's mind. So it can be very difficult to come forward and say, hey, this happened. So.
Plus, you get shredded the second you say it. And so I've always kind of had that curiosity about that question, why did it wait? And I think, you've said something and I'm clawing at you, but why would you not say something? There's a lot of punishment. And I think that's really something that kind of goes back to what Michelle was talking about. Again, it's kind of like the basics of, it's sort of the basics of Buddhism. One of the basics of Buddhism is we belong to each other. We are interconnected. We believe that strongly. And in that interconnection, we've sort of lost a lot of our ability to support each other because as Buddhism has gotten more popular, as it's gotten more social mediaized, it's sort of falling into what I sort of call the cult of positivity. If you're bringing up something that is thought to be negative or challenging, there's this almost immediate wash of, well, you're just being negative. That's not what we do. We can choose our attitude. And while there's always a bit of truth to that, the reality is speaking the truth of sexual misconduct, speaking the truth that somebody who claims not to understand responsibility probably shouldn't be a leader, isn't negative, it's factual. And we've created this linguistic blur. And in last night's thing, there was, of course, a scroll where people could write on, and you would see it about, and I'm sure, Ms. Lauren, if you looked at the scroll, you saw it too. Somebody would say something like, why don't you just tell the truth? Or why don't you something? And immediately 3 or 4 people would come and say, this isn't a place to be negative. If you're going to be that way. I mean, when I was like, well, that's not really the Buddhist way. You're not saying what I like, so get the heck out, and I think that's part of that is we need to kind of get back to the understanding that the practice of Buddhism in large part and across all traditions is the practice of being an authentic human being. Not just being sunshine and smiles because we're so equanimous and we've chosen to have an attitude of happiness. And I think in losing our authenticity to that fear of or accusation of negativity, we've lost a lot of truth and we've gained a lot of those gray areas where people who are acting badly feel like they can get by with it.
And I think that's part of why I have such kind of surprise at the way that this has gone down, because they were such strong proponents at ATS of, this is about pushing your edges. This is about finding your edges. This is about looking at your shadow side. This is about working with your shadow side. Like, what does that look like? Identifying it, those were all discussions that we would have. So to have it then come out like this about, the kind of thing where if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all. It's like, well, then what the fuck are we doing? There we go for mom. Gotcha. So, but what are we doing? If we're not going to hold each other accountable and call each other out on it, like, we can still do that within community. And that's, if I look at how this whole thing has gone down with ATS, I don't know that it was all managed in the most skillful of manners, because he was pushed out, but he also had made some of the choices. A lot of people were commenting today on how he threw Vinny under the bus by saying that Vinny didn't want the responsibility and that kind of thing. And I saw that a lot today, but very few, if anyone, commented on the way that he threw Joanna under the bus. And, you know, he said Joanna brought Andre in as the executive director, and then Joanna created a new board of directors. You know, Noah had a part in that too. That was not, Noah was on board with Andre being the ED. Noah was on board with, you know, the creation of the new board of directors. This was not, these were not actions in which he did not have any skin in the game. Culpability, however you want to put it, he had it. It was there. So then to turn around and not say, you know what, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry for any of the pain that I may have caused. I'm really sorry for my actions, that my actions caused you harm. I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, I was talking with someone else today, and the point was brought up that, you know, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And that the point was also brought up that there's a lot of people that make false claims. And that's true. That does happen.
No, it's not a lot of people. But there are people who make false claims.
Right. There are people who make false claims. And obviously, it has not been, you know, put in front of a judge in a court and all that. So just want to make it clear that we're not pointing the finger saying one person is guilty, because we don't know that. However, I think as women and as a culture as a whole, you get tired of the same story getting repeated over and over and over again. And it just, there doesn't seem to be, each time, I guess I'm trying to say each time there's a surprise. Oh, I don't think that person would ever do that. You know, they're a good person. I've looked up to this person. They, you know, I know them. I don't think that's possible. This person's enlightened, or, you know, they're a priest or a teacher, or, and the fact is, you know, everybody is human. We're all subject to making mistakes in life. And that guru worship that seems to happen of putting people on a pedestal really, I think, just kind of supports that whole, well, you know, we have to prove it first. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't prove it, because I don't want it to be construed that way. Yes, of course, we should prove it. That's the way the justice system works. But it gets a little frustrating that card gets pulled so often, I guess is what I'm trying to say, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, because that saying, you know, well, you have to, he's innocent until proven guilty. Well, then what are the women? Are they immune until, like, what happens there? It has already taken like so much energy to put forward and come forward and speak that truth. You know, speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. It takes so much to get to that point. And sometimes what you need is someone else to step forward and be able to say, you know what? That happened to me too. You know what? You're not the only one. And look, sarcasm is my first language all of the time. It's not my proudest moment, but that's the way that it is. And I, you know, I will generally say things like, you know, my family's really crazy. I'm sure I'm the only one. None of you have any idea what that's like. Of course, all of you know what that's like. I don't really think that my family is the craziest. Okay, not always, but you know, there has to be a level at which we can have the honest conversation where we can be supportive of each other, where we can say, you know what, this really sucked. This is what happened. And it's taken me this long because I had to build the courage from inside on my own. And now to say that this other person is innocent until proven guilty, you know, and it's not even about, like, we're not saying that Noah's a serial rapist, but we are saying that maybe his actions weren't wise and he was maybe not living up to the precepts that, you know, to those vows that he took. And, you know, he said that he brought it forward to the Teachers Council initially, and he felt like that should be where it ended, and it didn't. Well, no, it didn't. And more people came forward, and more people came forward. And it's not more people, more women came forward, because let's call it what it is. More women came forward. And just as much as he has claimed his right to use his position, his power, to explain himself and to say, this is why I can't believe that this is going on, and you know, this is why I say that it didn't happen. We have to say, what about them? What about them? What happened to them? Where do they get? And then we use the ugly pieces of man, social media is really a killer. Just ugly. I've seen people who have said that, you know, he should sue them all and ruin their lives the way that they have ruined his. Really? That's where we are? Or that they
Again,
won't.
that's a deflection of blame. They ruined his life, not his actions. His choices have brought his life to this point.
Right.
And I think that's exactly where a lot of that is the number of women who falsely report is statistically very small.
And yet you would think it was like 200%.
Yeah, and you hit a really good point, which is the male is innocent until proven guilty, but the reporting female is guilty until we can corroborate her innocence. And it is part of that sexism. It is part of that patriarchy that places men and women on different sides of the same coin. But everything he said last night confirmed just a disconnect with the third precept, with the idea of sexual harm. Everything he said was either minimizing about women, except the one woman who he threw under the bus for causing this. You know, he talks about, you know, how he's relationally immature. And I have a series of notes and quotes from this. And he's talking about how he didn't think there should have been you know, and I think that's part in this story and also in the story with Shambhala and Sekyung. These have been investigated by third parties. And third parties have concluded these are actual things. You know, this isn't just something that somebody pulled out of the air. But as he's talking about this, and he says, you know, I have a sense of denial about power. I have a sense of denial about responsibility. And, you know, I'm not very good at relationships. I can't tell where the lines are. The lines are very blurry. And then he segues off and says, when I'm dating someone, I become an alpha and I get really dominant. And, you know, I want to wash my ears out at this point because I'm thinking, one, I don't want to know this. And two, you just pretty much said, yes, I demean women. And I don't understand that. Not that all dominance is women demeaning. There are entire systems of submission and dominance that are very healthy. But that was not what I heard last night. And then he abruptly stops because, I don't know, maybe the imaginary lawyer who's not letting him take any responsibility started exploding. But he got off of the dominance issue really fast. Although in that he said, quote, I like to get really dominant. And I found some people really like that. You know, and so I don't need to question whether or not these accusations are real because a third party already did that. And it pretty much just sort of poured out of his mouth in the same time. And immediately after that, he started talking about the most important thing you need to do is forgive yourself. So everything goes back to me, me, me. And I think that's where a lot of that co-opting is and why women do find it hard to speak up. And what we need to do is change that automatic flip to where she's unbelievable, even though that's statistically unlikely, and usually ultimately very provable, particularly in multiple accounts that are all the same.
Okay. Well, we should probably wrap this up here. I think this has been a really good discussion. And I think it needs to happen more often. I think we need to talk, not just females, but everybody, men, women. It needs to be a conversation we have with our kids, with our friends, with our nieces and nephews, with our partners, with our husbands, our wives, our family members. It needs, you know, I hear a lot of where people are tired of hearing about it. Well, I'm tired of the fact that it happens over and over and over and over again.
I think that we're all pretty done with that. It's 2018 and we're having to have this fucking conversation again.
Right. Exactly.
Because we're tired of living with it. You know, I think if you're tired of hearing about it, you're in a position of privilege.
Yes.
Because if we're tired of living it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And not hearing about it, not talking about it doesn't make it not happen.
Oh, seriously.
Exactly. So any final words before we wrap up?
Thank you very much for putting this together.
Thank you for being
here. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, this is just a great way to communicate and just keep that dialogue going.
Yeah,
I really appreciate that this was here.
I appreciate that you guys are here, and I hope that once this is posted, we get some dialogue going, some real dialogue from this. I really hope so. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will stop the recording.